Dinosaurs. You guys excited? I always tell people, everybody likes dinosaurs because like kids love dinosaurs, but old people are just kids that grew up, so everybody likes dinosaurs. You know, it's kind of funny. I've actually done a talk similar to this one on a Sunday morning at a church, and I remember, getting prepared, and people see the slide, and they're looking around like, this is church next Sunday. Like, we're going to talk about Jesus, right? Like, what are we talking about dinosaurs for? And it might not be the most important topic biblically, but there is a connection to what we've been dealing with here this weekend, and just give you a practical example. The young man that's manning the table out there is Joshua, and he's the oldest son of one of my good friends, Corey McKenna. Corey McKenna runs the Cross Current ministry here in Canada. We've been friends for a long time, even since before we were both saved, and he's got an evangelistic ministry, the Cross Current. Encourage you to check into that ministry. It's fantastic. If you want to learn how to share your faith, that's what it's all about. Anyway, he had implemented what we call GO teams, gospel outreach teams, at the church I was attending at the time. And so this is probably about 8 years ago now, and I'm part of the GO teams. We're going out onto the streets of London. We're passing tracts out to people. We're chatting, sharing the gospel, etc. And the group I was with, we came upon these two younger fellows, probably university age, waiting for their bus. And we were like, good, they can't run away. And so the team leader starts sharing the gospel with these two guys. Now, almost immediately, one of the fellows just turns around. He's like, no, I'm not listening to this. But the other fellow, as the guy was sharing the gospel, he was just constantly like just waiting to interject, trying to get his point in. And the guy knew what he was doing. He kept going, and he shared the gospel. And as soon as his lips shut, this is what the fellow did. He goes, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you Christians believe about dinosaurs? First question. And the leader looked at him, and he looked at me, and he goes, well, go talk to that guy, because he knows what I do. And I said to the young man, I said, dinosaurs. I said, wow, dinosaurs are great proof of the historicity of the Bible. What? And I said, no, dinosaurs are great proof of the historicity of the Bible. He goes, what are you talking about? And I said, well, look, just take your phone there, type in Mary Schweitzer soft tissue T-Rex. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, come on, man, just go ahead. Mary Schweitzer soft. I said, yeah, pretty interesting, isn't it? A tyrannosaur bone with soft tissue in it, unfossilized, supposedly 70 million years old. See, God's not going to use this excuse of supposed evolution and stuff like that to discredit the Bible on Judgment Day. You're going to stand in front of God, and he's going to say, no, the evidence that I existed was plainly seen. And we started to have this great conversation, and unfortunately the bus came and he had to leave, etc. And I've used that illustration several times since then because I wanted to point things out to people. You see, just prior to my conversation with him, that young man had been listening to the most important information any human being can hear. And that's the saving message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And yet, as important as that information was, he was basically sitting there going, la, 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 until the guy could stop talking so he could say, what about dinosaurs, Christians? Now, I wonder why he was doing that. I don't wonder, because he kind of communicated to me, and I know how the deal works. Here's what it works. What do you Christians believe about dinosaurs? Because dinosaurs evolved into birds, which means evolution's fact, which means creation's not true, which means your Bible isn't trustworthy, and why are you telling me about some dead guy who came back to life to save me from my sins? When it's all mythology. So having a reason for your faith and being able to disarm him and then get back to the conversation of salvation through Jesus was an important thing. And these types of topics were important for me in my growth and the way the Lord led me to the Lord, to himself, which is pretty cool. So again, we're always hammering this drum. We need to trust God's word from the very beginning. It should be the source of where we start all conversations, and that has to do with things like dinosaurs as well. Okay? I mean, John 1:3 is very clear. All things were made through him. Without him, not was anything that was made. Colossians 1:16, for by him all things were created in heaven and earth, the visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. This is Jesus it's speaking about. Jesus, the creator, as revealed in the book of Colossians. So, of course, God knows about dinosaurs. Of course, we should be able to go to his word to learn about things like this. And so what we're going to do here for the next little while is use the Bible to explain dinosaurs, okay? So let's just get some ground level information here from the book of Genesis. God said he created in 6 days. He says exactly what he created on each one of those days, okay? It's very plainly written. And then day 6 of creation, he creates land animals and people. And at the end of the creation, he said everything was very good. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a talk called The 7 C's of History, and Answers in Genesis, of course, we like to use this illustration to talk about the big picture of what the Bible teaches: creation, corruption, catastrophe, confusion, Christ, cross, consummation, and I'll be going through that tomorrow. But that's the history of the Bible from beginning to end, and so obviously, when we're talking about dinosaurs, then these concepts and these things we're going to learn about, dinosaurs must fit into this framework somewhere, correct? Because there's no other framework to begin with. You know, people will say to me, well, dinosaurs were prehistoric creatures. Here's a tip. There's no such thing as a prehistoric creature, because there's no such thing as prehistory, because it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's when history started, and there's nothing prior to that. Okay? In this time-space continuum we're in. So what we're going to use is the 7 F's of dinosaurs. We like 7s in Answers in Genesis. God's perfect number, right? So the 7 F's of history to explain dinosaurs within the 7 C's, okay? And the first F we're going to talk about is dinosaurs when they were formed. There's your first F, okay? So think about it this way. Does the Bible tell us when God created T-Rex? I've actually given you enough information already to answer that question. You see, dinosaurs were land animals by definition, okay? And T-Rex was a land animal. And God said he created land animals and people on day 6 of creation, so we know when God created dinosaurs. But see, that flies in the face already. I bet you. There's a whole bunch of you right now. The hair on the back of your neck is just kind of creeping up a little bit. Like, what? Dinosaurs and people live together? I don't know. Well, according to the scripture, that's what it would indicate if you didn't have any other prior information coming in. But there's a lot of other information that's been informing Christians for many years. Evolutionary information, things like National Geographic, for example. You know, no human being has ever seen a live dinosaur. Yet we know, da-da-da-da-da-da. How do they know? How do they know that no human being? I mean, the only way you would know that is if somehow you could interview everybody throughout history. Hey, have you ever seen one? Have you seen one? Right? How do they know that? Well, they're basing that off of their belief in the story of evolution. And of course, our kids are inundated with this kind of stuff, right? The Land Before Time and, Night at the Museum and all these games and Jurassic Park, and that's where we get information from. As a matter of fact, atheists have admitted, here's a typical, online atheist, and he actually said, dinosaurs were my gateway drug to atheism. And while I was still 6 or 7 years away from reaching the conclusion that God either didn't care about us or didn't exist, the dinosaurs had shared an important secret that the Bible can be wrong, just like the young fellow we were witnessing to on the street. What do you Christians believe about dinosaurs? So, we know when God formed the dinosaurs on day 6 of creation in the beginning, which means people and dinosaurs obviously coexisted. And I remember one time at the church I was attending in Guelph years ago, I don't even know how it came up in a small group Bible study, and I mentioned, that would be the case. And this lady, very godly lady, loved the Lord, she was just like, well, I just don't think so. And I said, well, why don't you think so? And she's like, well, I don't think God would have created these big scary creatures to be in the Garden of Eden. Somebody might have got hurt. And she was thinking about those things, right? But apparently she'd kind of forgot that in the beginning, God created creatures as fearless. That's our next F, right? In the beginning, what was everything eating? Plants, which would include the dinosaurs. And people go, well, I just don't know. I mean, plants? Sharp teeth? I mean, we need to consider that very good means no evil, no death, no carnivorous activity, We don't look at a cat even playing with a mouse, toying it to death, thinking that's very good. Bloodshed, carnivorous activity, etc., right? But she was hung up on the teeth. So I said to her, well, what about like the great cats, like the lions and the tigers? I mean, think about it, guys. If they let a tiger in that door back there, there'd be an exodus out that door pretty quickly right now, wouldn't there? Yeah. You know why? Because tigers aren't very nice, okay? And they use their teeth in a different way than they would have in the beginning. And, God said everything's eating plants. People get hung up on the sharp teeth. But have you ever watched a bear? Bears will eat fish and stuff like that. We live in a sin-cursed world. But you know what bears love to eat? They love berries. You ever see a bear eat blueberries, for example? I'm a terrible blueberry picker. I just eat them. I never finish collecting them. But bears have amazing teeth. See, they take their sharp teeth and they put them around the bush and they go like this and they rake the blueberries off. They love blueberries. Perfectly designed for raking those things. See, we see the remnant of the original creation even in this marred creation we live in. For example, things like alligators, crocodiles, everybody knows what they eat, right? Let's watch this short video here. This alligator farm. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, he would have bit down on anything you threw in his mouth, but keep watching. They feed this whole farm all sorts of fruits and veggies and stuff like that, and they really like it. As a matter of fact, pretty soon you'll see a crocodile, and he'll start climbing up a tree, this kumquat tree, and they like kumquats, and they'll eat those as well. Here he is. Very interesting. They've actually found out now that crocodiles and alligators eat all sorts of legumes and vegetables and all that kind of stuff in large quantities, okay? So the shape of something's teeth doesn't tell you what it has to eat. It's just we see what things are eating today in this sin-cursed world. It's amazing, actually. I was doing some research on crocodiles. You know, crocodiles can climb trees, like 30-foot tall trees. I don't mean like the huge ones, but like 4 or 5 foot crocodiles, they'll actually climb a tree 30 feet tall. Imagine being a bird watcher, you're like, whoa, right? Might think evolution is true, like, Anyway, yeah. So the shape of something's teeth doesn't tell you what it has to eat, okay? You guys, every now and then you carve a pumpkin. What do you need to carve a great big pumpkin? Big, sharp instrument, correct? So it wouldn't have been until after the fall that their diet would have changed, so to speak. And that's when what we're getting to here in our next F, okay? Because the entire creation groans because of the fall. Reminding you again that Romans 5:12 says, through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned, okay? It's man's sin that brought death into the world. We know the whole creation has been groaning in pains of childbirth until now, Romans 8:22, and so we can understand this. As a matter of fact, lots of bad things, and including things that happened to dinosaurs. For example, we find cancer in dinosaur bones, okay? That couldn't have occurred before the fall, right? There's brain tumors. We find all sorts of things. And by the way, I'm just talking about dinosaurs, but we find these examples in many, many other creatures we find in the fossil record. And reminding you again, if you weren't here yesterday, that if you're saying that those 6 days of creation were really millions and billions of years and the rock layers got laid down there, some Christians have accepted this type of idea. What you're really accepting then is those rock layers got laid down during the 6 days of creation before Adam sinned, which means the record of death contained within the rock layers happened prior to Adam sinning, and the wages of sinning is death. And the gospel doesn't make sense because you've got death before sin. So, okay, they became fallen, like along with everything else. So now we got to explain these fossils. If they didn't happen during the 6 days of creation, when did they happen? How do you get a dinosaur 6 feet tall when it's slumped over, buried in sedimentary rock? Well, we're to our next F here, which would be, of course, the Great Flood. If you haven't done so recently, I would encourage you, maybe tonight's devotionals, read Genesis 6-9, okay? What do you see there? The fountains of the great deep smash open. There's 40 days of torrential rain. Have you guys seen video footage of what 3 days of torrential rain will do? All the sediments, all the biomass, everything mixing together and just rushing off in a great slurry, laying down rock layers. It's incredible what the power of water will do. 40 days of that, and then a year-long event. What would you expect to find if Genesis 6 to 9 was real history? Billions of dead things buried in sedimentary layers all over the planet. You know what I've seen every place I've ever gone on this planet? Dead things buried in sediments everywhere. And we don't see it happening today, do we, folks? When's the last time you saw fossilization occur? That's about it. But how come there's billions of these things buried everywhere? It was a global flood. God sent the flood to wipe out the wickedness of man. He said he's going to blot everything out. And he said it was going to be a global flood. The fountains of the great deep burst open. The windows of the heavens were opened. And all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered to a depth of more than 20 feet. So the flood makes sense of the fossils. You need to understand, again, the difference between historical and operational science. I want to make a statement you need to understand. There isn't one thing that we observe in science that a creationist and an evolutionist doesn't agree with. There is no observation we make that we don't agree with. It's the interpretation of the observation we disagree with. Because if an evolutionary scientist and a creationist scientist walk up to a rock layer and there's a dead thing and they're saying, hey, look, there's a fossil there. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think that thing's 70 million years old. Oh, I think it got buried in the Great Flood. You're both observing the same thing, but then you're explaining it, the history of it, according to your worldview. Because fossils don't come out of the ground with little labels on them saying, hi, I'm 65 million years old. That's the result of an interpretation depending on what your worldview is. Okay? I talked about last night about how, fossilization, how it's supposed to occur, and these common tropes that we see. Here's how you create a fossil. Fish is going along, fish dies, gets to the bottom, gets covered over slowly. You might lay 1 or 2 varves down per year, it adds up, and you create fossils. Folks, that doesn't work. I was near Dundas one time doing some fossil hunting, came across this plaque, and I was, Niagara Escarpment, 100 meters of rock layer, sedimentary rock layer. The plaque said that 100 meters got laid down in 50 million years. So I did the calculation. Okay, how long would it take to lay down 1 centimeter of rock according to their calculations? You know what it was? 5,000 years. 5,000 years you're going to lay down 1 centimeter of rock. Here's Mr. Fish. He's 2 centimeters thick. Had a heart attack. How long is he going to lay there before he gets covered over? 10,000 years. Do fish hang around on the bottom of lakes and rivers for 10,000 years waiting to be covered over? You're driving along, you see the deer that got hit last week in the ditch. Is that thing going to sit there? No. You need to bury these things rapidly and completely, very, very quickly. I want you to understand something that will change your idea about fossils. Fossils are the evidence of an event that happened quickly, not slowly. It's so ingrained in fossils, millions of years. No, fossils are the evidence of something happening fast, not slow. It's very interesting to look at the modern evolutionary literature. For example, you've got the Tyrrell Museum out in Alberta, world-class dinosaur museum, and Dr. Phil Curry, he's an evolutionist. He's worked with them for a while. He wrote a book called 101 Questions About Dinosaurs. And in his book, he talks about fossilization this way. Now, this is a PhD scientist and an evolutionist. Look what he says. Fossilization is a process that can take anything from a few hours to millions of years. I wonder which one of those 2 processes Dr. Curry has observed. I would say a few hours. Why would you believe it takes millions of years if you haven't observed it? He says it can happen within a few hours. He says the amount of time that it takes for a bone to become completely permineralized is highly variable. If the groundwater is heavily laden with minerals in solution, the process can happen rapidly. They've observed fossilization take place very quickly under certain conditions, right? And I would imagine at the time of the Great Flood, with all the swirl of sediments and all that stuff, that would make a great time to make fossils, which is why we continue to find soft tissue in dinosaur bones, which is what I mentioned to the young lad. That's the pictures he brought up on his phone when I asked him to look it up. Soft and stretchy, unfossilized blood vessels, red blood cells inside of a dinosaur found in 2005. Incredible. Folks, that's like walking out into the Sahara Desert and finding an ice cream cone sitting there. It's like, that shouldn't be there. Correct. And I've continued to follow the secular literature on this. Came across an article, it was called Accidental Discovery of Blood, Collagen Could Rewrite Textbooks, because they've found it now over 100 times. Okay, they continue to find it. And the article said it suggests that nearly every fossil science studied in the past could contain similarly well-preserved blood and tissue samples. Well, if nearly every fossil could do that, that means they're very young. They got formed just a little while ago, not millions of years ago. Now, of course, we always get the connection between when you're talking about dinosaurs, you're talking about the flood, and then people want to know about Noah's flood and dinosaurs, so I won't take too much time here. But, you'll get people saying, but how, would dinosaurs have been on the ark then? How could you, if Noah's flood was a real event and they asked the land animals to get on there? And I think one of the big things that are going on in people's head is, again, they're not thinking biblically. They've got these images in their head. Like many times I'll go to a church. You walk into the nursery, this is the way to depict Noah's ark. The goofy little bathtub ark. You got the giraffe sticking out the top. It always looks overcrowded. There's never any dinosaurs. Doesn't look like a real boat. Doesn't look like a real event, right? And so from a very young age, kids look at that and they go, oh yeah, it's just a fairy tale. Little Red Riding Hood and Noah's Ark. Yeah, the event, the first time God judged the entire population of the planet. You ever see Tim Hawkins? He jokes about it. He's like, oh, let's draw a real depiction on the kids' wall. Some guy hanging on a rock screaming or something. Genesis 6:19-20 says, you're to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, and 2 of every kind that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive, except dinosaurs. Oh, that's not in there? It would have meant they got on the ark. See, there's a much better depiction of Noah's Ark. That's the way we built it down in Kentucky, of course, to the biblical dimensions. If you want to know how much capacity was on that ark, if you haven't been there, it's going to blow your mind just walking around the 3 floors there. But picture it this way. Look at a transport truck. Look at the carrying capacity, okay? You could fit 483 of those trucker cars on board Noah's Ark. That's the immensity of that structure. So, it's 2 of every kind of creature that's supposed to go on the ark. Now, if you remember the talk last night, it doesn't mean that God sent 2, Great Danes and 2 poodles and 2. No, he sent 2 of the dog kind. 2 of every kind, 7 of some creatures got on the ark. Remember where all the dog kinds came from? Wolves. So wolves were probably closer to the kind of dog kinds that God sent to Noah. By the way, the Bible doesn't say Noah was running around like some zoologist picking stuff up all over the place. It says that God sent the animals to Noah. He just built the ark, and then they arrived, and he said, that away. So when you think of the dinosaurs, for example, it's the same as dogs. For example, here's the Ceratopsia. This is the classification. You give it a Latin name, it sounds really scientific. You got the Triceratops and the Torosaurus and the Protoceratops, all this kind of stuff. But you all notice that they have a frill and they got a beak, and some of them have more horns than others, etc. But they're all the same kind, just like they're the same kind of creature. So God didn't need to send thousands of different dinosaurs. There were probably only about 50 dinosaur kinds that went on the ark. And I really highly encourage this book to understand this. This is one of the most common questions we get, and the most common ways evolutionists try to trick people. Well, you couldn't have spent, there are millions of species of animals on the planet, which is correct, but there aren't millions of kinds of animals on the planet. And so this is a fantastic book to teach young people to understand those concepts, and not just young people, adults as well. But I highly encourage that book because it defeats one of the major arguments we hear for evolution and understanding how the animals could have fit on the ark. Because let's face it, this is the way people depict it, right? In their head. Like Noah's sitting there trying to get a 70-ton Ultrasaurus on board Noah's ark. And it's just goofy. But he didn't need to take Grandma and Grandpa Dinosaur on board the ark. The command was that they were going to come off the ark. They're going to be fruitful and multiply. Well, who do you want? You want the young teenage creatures, right? And think of it this way, too. All dinosaurs don't start big. They actually start pretty small. That's the largest dinosaur egg we've ever seen, about this big. So when that thing hatched and it was a teenager, it wouldn't have been a giant creature, okay? So you go to the Ark Encounter, they explain things like that as well. So the flood is what explains the fossils, okay? Now the next F we're going to come to is faded. Because, you see, real historical events become faded over time, and the fact is people did coexist with dinosaurs. They didn't call them dinosaurs. We'll get into that. I mean, think about it. If you were going to get a word, because dinosaur is a very modern word, but you were going to describe something like a T-Rex, big reptilian creature, what would be a good, a replacement word? I would say dragon. And did you know that there are dragon legends all over the world? Not as just mythical creatures, but people groups from this entire planet that say in their past, their ancestors observed these large reptilian creatures, okay? And they're not mythological according to their legends. As a matter of fact, up until 1973 in the World Book Encyclopedia, you could read this entry. The dragons of legend are strangely like actual creatures that have lived in the past. They are much like the great reptiles, dinosaurs, which inhabited the earth long before man is supposed to have appeared on earth. That was in the World Book Encyclopedia. Saying, yeah, there's people groups all over the world say they saw these big things, these big reptiles. So we've got things like St. George and the Dragon, which was written as real history. It's been mythologized now. The flag of Wales actually has a dragon on it. Some of our old Bible commentaries actually speak of dragons. You've got things like the Chinese zodiac. Why does it have all these real creatures that we know of and have a dragon, one mythological creature stuck in with all these real creatures? Marco Polo, very famous historian, well-respected. He talks about seeing all these large creatures on his trips around the world. We've got artifacts like this Mesopotamian cylinder seal. This is a piece of metal, and what you do is roll it up, and then you would roll it on clay, and it would make imprints of what was on the metal. Easy to see what it looks like, what's imprinted there. Keep that one in mind, by the way. I'm going to bring that up again later on. We've got fossils that we've seen, things like DRACOREX, they call it. And what would that thing look like with some meat and flesh on it? Well, National Geographic actually depicted it. What would you call that thing if it was running at you? A dragon, yeah. Cambodia, there's a temple, Angkor, and you see one of the stone columns, and it's got these circles with these different creatures inside. Let me blow one of them up here for you. See the guy? He's on all fours. See the plates on his back? See his tail? Anybody remember what that one's called? Who said that? What was it? Stegosaurus, that's awesome. I'll do these dinosaur talks for especially little kids. Churches want you to come in and do a talk for kids. You always do the dinosaur talk. And I'll have kids 7 years old, that's a Stegosaurus. And I'm like, how do you know that's a Stegosaurus? Because it's in my dinosaur book. It's in Jurassic Park. Daddy, let me watch it. Don't tell Mommy. But the point is this. In Cambodia 800 years ago, they didn't have dinosaur books. And they didn't have Land Before Time movies. So how could they, that's a very specific dinosaur. There's only one kind like that with the plates on the back, right? Because they saw one. That's the most logical explanation of what you're seeing. When I went to England, you tour all these large cathedrals and stuff. They're just amazing. And Carlisle Cathedral, they've got a man named Richard Bell buried there. And his tomb is actually in the floor. They used to bury people in the floor. Anyway, and his tomb is inlaid with brass all around, and of course it's softer metal, so they put a carpet over top so it doesn't get worn away. But if you get them to pull it back, you can see all sorts of depictions like birds and different creatures, in the brass. See the bird there? Dog, right? Fish. Oh, that's interesting. Two creatures, long necks, long tails. Do you notice that their necks are entwined? Isn't this interesting? You've got two different artifacts produced by two different cultures, separated geographically by hundreds of kilometers and separated in time by hundreds of years, depicting these creatures in the same activity. Great evidence that those people saw these creatures. You know how rams will butt their heads together, or giraffe's neck, they call it? And that's not the only one. There's this also this vase, the Narmer Palette, and it depicts these creatures doing the same thing. So, see, it's faded from people's memory, but what we call them dinosaurs. People used to call them dragons generically. If you actually look up like the King James Version, for example, if you go to like Bible Gateway, you look up the different versions of the Bible, type in keyword dragon. You'll see that word come up several times, and not just as an allusion to Satan or anything like that, but as real creatures, the dragon and the owl in the wilderness, etc. So why is this association that what we call dinosaurs today, things that people have seen in the past, dragons, why has that been kind of put to the side? Well, Louis Jacobs, he was a famous scientist and not a Bible believer. He said this: such an association, dragons, dinosaurs being the same thing, would dispel an earth with vast antiquity. The entire history of creation, including the day of rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. Evolution would be vanquished. You see what the atheists admitted? If people really saw these things, that means creation could be true, and we don't want that because we're evolutionists. But again, it's not because of the science. Okay? You can interpret those bones many different ways. Now, people will say things like, well, why don't we see dinosaurs in the Bible? Well, again, you're not going to see the word dinosaur. It's a modern word, okay? But when we look in the Bible, for example, Job 40, and we just see what it describes there, creatures like the behemoth, we don't know exactly what that was, but we do have a description, so let's read it. Look at the behemoth which I made along with you. Do you remember on day 6 of creation, God created land animals and God created people? Look at this creature which I made along with you, which feeds on grass like an ox. His strength is in his loins, the power in the muscles of his belly. His tail sways like a cedar. It's got a tail like a tree. You know the cedars of Lebanon? These huge trees. Sinews of his thighs, close knit. Bones are like tubes of bronze. It's the first among the works of God. It's like, look at this thing. That's a great description of a sauropod dinosaur. However, even the Christian church has been so evolutionized that you'll look at your study Bibles, for example. Oftentimes, you know how a study Bible works, right? You've got the top part, that's the inspired word of the infallible God, and you got the bottom part there, which is the uninspired opinion of fallible men. In my personal experience, I find that the top part makes a great expository on the lower part, not the other way around. Because, for example, you look up the ESV study Bible, it says that the behemoth was probably the elephant or a hippo. Well, have you ever seen the hiney of an elephant or a hippo? It doesn't exactly have a tail that sways like a cedar. But they can't imagine it could be a dinosaur because many of these people have bought into the story of evolution. So, usually I do this for the little kids, but I say, hey, look at this big tail. Does that work? And they're like, no. They're all good. You know, even Job 41 talks about a creature called Leviathan. Now, this creature, Leviathan, is very interesting because it's got like almost impenetrable scales, and it can go in and out of the water, and it breathes fire. And right there, some Christians, well, it breathes fire. It's just got to be some kind of mythology in Scripture. It's not written that way. It's talking about a real creature. Now, we don't know exactly what Leviathan was, but here's a good candidate. They call it super croc. It's an extinct, bones of a crocodile they found. And what's amazing, I mean, look at those 2 skulls there. See the more whiter skull, the little one? That's a big crocodile. And yet look at how big super croc was. But what's most interesting about super croc is you'll see that it has a very bulbous nose. And we don't know what it did with that nose. Could it perhaps, mix some kind of chemical formula and blast out, snorts of fire or something like that? I have no problem believing something like that. Because think about it. Let's say these creatures are extinct. Let's say electric eels were extinct. Let's say we'd never seen a live electric eel. We go into the fossil and we see this thing that looks like a snake, and we're like, man, what's that creature? Could you even imagine if you'd never seen a live one that when it was alive, it could hit you with 1,000 volts of electricity? Would that even cross your mind if you hadn't seen one? No. That's in all the soft tissues, right? How about things like a kangaroo? You'd never seen a live kangaroo. You just see bones. Would you imagine it had a joey in a little pouch and it would never cross your mind. So I have no problem believing that the dragons of old were just dinosaurs in history that have finally gone extinct, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But this whole age of dinosaurs thing that they keep swinging, which is what I got taught, they'd show me some kind of, I remember having this exact diagram in a dinosaur book when I was a kid. You know, here's how the fossil record works. There's these creatures at the bottom, and then a little more sophisticated, and then the dinosaurs, and then mammals, and then people. And it's always that way. Well, it's not always that way. I know, because I've worked with geologists and paleontologists for years now, and I know what's actually been found, which is our next F, alongside dinosaur bones. Years ago, when I was preparing my talk, I wanted to get examples from secular articles about creatures that have been found alongside dinosaurs, and I'll share a couple with you here. The first one was called Cretaceous Duck Ruffles Feathers. That was the title of the article. I thought, why did this finding of this duck ruffle the feathers of evolutionists? Well, because they found it in the same layer that you would find a tyrannosaur in. They've found ducks in the same layers they found tyrannosaurs. So now we know that ducks and dinosaurs lived at the same time. Okay? Here's some other ones I found. Mesozoic squirrel. Well, this is a flying squirrel. I remember flying squirrels up when I was in Pickle Lake with my parents years ago. And, you know, my mom would be baking, and these things would fly through the window. And, I mean, I was natural selection. I was like, that's my pie, not yours, squirrel. You're going to die. But anyway, they found this Mesozoic squirrel, but this guy's supposedly 70 million years old. So now squirrels and dinosaurs were coexisting according to, I'm just telling you what their story is, okay? I don't believe in the millions of years and all that stuff. I'm just telling you their data. And then I found this one. It was a 120 million year old platypus. Looked like a modern platypus. It had the, you know, electrosensors down its bill, and yeah, it lived alongside dinosaurs, supposedly. And then I found this one, Easter surprise, world oldest rabbit bones found. Now this one wasn't actually dinosaur era. It was maybe 50 million or something like that. But the fellow who found it, Professor Weibel, an evolutionist, said, well, I wouldn't be surprised if I went out in the field and found a Cretaceous rabbit that was 80 million years old. He's got no problem believing that rabbits and dinosaurs coexisted. Then I found this one, 164 million year old beaver. Yay, Canada. Right? I mean, according to the evolutionists, beavers had been duking it out with dinos for millions and millions of years. Pretty cool. Then I found this one. It was a 130 million year old something. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it was a mammal. They can see the construct of the skeleton. And inside the skeleton, inside its stomach contents, were the remains of a dinosaur. We now have fossil evidence of mammals eating dinosaurs. Okay? And they called it a Repenomamus robustus, or something like that. Actually, we carry this book called Living Fossils by Dr. Carl Werner, and in it he demonstrates all the different creatures that have been found in dinosaur layer rock, like birds and bees and, you know, lobsters and frogs and pine trees and parrots and owls and all sorts of things that have been buried alongside dinosaurs. So basically what you find in the fossil record is billions of dead things buried in sediments. Matter of fact, in his book, he quotes evolutionists. One of them said this, we find mammals in almost all of our dinosaur dig sites. These were not noticed years ago. They just never noticed all the mammals mixed in with the dinosaurs. Interesting when I was growing up. And he admits, he goes, we've got about 20,000 pounds of bentonite clay. There's mammal fossils that we're just trying to give away to some researcher. It's not that they're not important. It's just that you only live once, and I specialized in something other than mammals. I specialized in reptiles and dinosaurs. You know, one great hope I have for the church is that some of our young people here, I've already talked to some of them. You guys got the sharps, you got the smarts, okay? That you would be able to enter into higher education, get your PhD, and if this is your area of interest, you know, keep your faith intact, even under evolutionary indoctrination, and get out there and find what is in those rock layers that have been buried together. Because with a creationist mindset, you're going to notice these things a little bit quicker than perhaps the evolutionists will. And show the evidence that gives glory to our Creator God. As a matter of fact, Patricia Engler is, you've seen her on the promo reel that shows in between the sessions, and she does a show called CT Scan. She was 12 or 13 years old, I can't remember, and she saw Ken Ham speaking at a conference in Alberta years ago. And she has been totally honest with me. She told me, things like creation and Noah's Ark, she goes, I thought that was for Christian geeks. She said it didn't mean anything to me. She saw Ken speak, and she saw a talk similar to the first one I did last night, and she realized all of our doctrines are wrapped up in this. She was so excited, she became an apologist. And at 18 years old, she entered secular university. She took a 4-year evolution course, studied under evolutionary indoctrination for 4 years, came out with her faith intact. She now speaks for the ministry. You can watch her on Answers News down the States. She's been down there for a while. And she got her degree. And then she decided to do this amazing tour around the world. Just God inspired her to travel around the world. She called her trip 360 and 180. She went around the world in 180 days, all self-funded, interviewing postgraduate Christian students, said, what kept you strong in your faith? And her brand new book, Prepare to Thrive, just came out. I really encourage you to check that out. If you've got young people that are looking at, it's just a primer on how to survive secular indoctrination in schools. And she's got ultra practical stuff. I really encourage people, watch that CT scan show, check out that book. It's a phenomenal tool. We're excited to promote. Back to dinosaurs, and Dr. Werner's book, another evolutionist said, well, in a sense, the age of dinosaurs is a misnomer. Means it just didn't, it's misnamed. Mammals are just one such important group that lived with dinosaurs, coexisted with dinosaurs, and survived the dinosaurs. So there was no such thing as an age of dinosaurs. That's just evolutionary baggage, which leads us to the last part here, which is fiction. This is what we've been taught. That's why we call it the story of evolution, because that's what evolution is. It's a story. You don't observe evolution. You don't see things changing from one kind into another. Nobody's observed millions of years. It's a story that replaces Genesis. Creation is what it is. I mean, we went over this last night, but dinos into birds, really? I mean, what do you need to demonstrate to turn that thing into that? We discussed it. Things like hollow bones and flight navigation systems and all sorts of different things like wings and feathers and lung systems. And that's just a couple of those things. And that's just one transformation. There would have had to have been billions of these types of transformations, and we don't observe them. This is absolutely impossible scientifically. And yet it's taught as fact and science. And it again comes down to whether you trust man's word or God's word, even in the area of dinosaurs. See, one of the biggest questions we get is, yeah, but what happened to them then? I mean, if they were created alongside man, they coexisted with man, they got on the ark, they got off the ark, and we see examples of people seeing them, but then they faded. So what happened to the dinos? Well, it's not just us that need to answer that, it's also the evolutionists. I want to show you some of the extinction models that evolutionists have proposed. There's several, of course. Now, just to prime this, let's just say I told you guys, here's my dinosaur extinction theory, okay? Here's Cal's dinosaur extinction theory. I think that the dinosaurs burped themselves to death. Okay, they just all got gas, and they just burped themselves to death. And you hear the chuckles. And yet, if you wrap it in a really cool picture, and you give the same title, and you say, scientists say, everybody goes, oh, yeah, makes sense, yeah, no antacids, so yeah. Do you realize how influenced you are by media? You should have picked up on it in the last 2 years. And people just absorb this stuff. I remember all sorts of dinosaur extinction stories, like the plants became poisonous. See, the plants evolved and they became poisonous, and the herbivores ate the plants, and then the carnivores ate the herbivores, and they all died out. But not the ducks, not the platypus, not the beavers. The mammals evolved and ate all the dinosaur eggs. Really? Well, if they were coexisting for millions of years, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Here's the ever-popular asteroid impact theory, right? You've all heard this. This giant asteroid smacks into the Yucatan Peninsula and just wipes out all the dinosaurs. But not the ducks. And not the platypus. And not... See the problems? See, the fact is, There are many dinosaur extinction theories because none of them explain it. The only dinosaur extinction theory I have never heard is this: there was a giant flood that killed the dinosaurs. That's the one extinction theory that you'll never hear from an evolutionist, that there was a global flood that wiped out the dinosaurs. And yet, when we look at the fossil evidence, for example, we see these creatures often in this very specific position. It's actually got a name. It's called the epistotonic death posture, with the back arched, and it's associated with death in immersion in water. And so many of the fossils we see are like this. But you'll never hear an evolutionist propose that there might have been a global flood on the planet. See, I think there's all sorts of reasons for dinosaur extinction, right? Here's just a couple I'll point out. One, hunting. I think that's why we've got all these dragon legends around the world. I mean, think about it. If there was some huge creature around here marauding or whatever like that could hurt your kids, you know what the guys are going to do. Well, the real guys. You're going to go out there and you're going to hunt that thing down and you're going to kill it. And you're going to find out where all the nests are and you're going to knock those out too. We get pretty good at taking things out when we have to, right? Habitat changes. Things are going extinct all the time, folks. That's why there's all these programs, Save the Whales and Save the Owls and the little yellow chickadee and all this kind of stuff, right? Genetic changes. Remember I talked about mutations? Some creatures, their genetics are crashing faster than others, and they're being mutated out of existence. Climate change, for example. Maybe dinosaurs couldn't adapt to different climates as well as other things. And we know there was an ice age after the flood, which might have taken out many of them, and then the stragglers just gradually went away. But it's not hard to understand in a big picture when you look at Scripture and when you look at the facts are from science, how to explain dinosaurs in a biblical worldview. It's just not. See, parents here, you need to understand something. The seeds of doubt of the biblical worldview start at a very, very young age. You know The Land Before Time? How many kids have watched The Land Before Time? And now they've got so many versions in what now, episode 22, Littlefoot goes to Hawaii or something. Right? I actually just produced a feature video. You can watch it on our YouTube channel. Or if you subscribe to the Answers in Genesis streaming platform called Answers.tv, it's got all of those DVDs you see out there all on one streaming platform, like Amazon or Netflix. It's less than $7 a month here in Canada. If you want to sign up for a week trial, go to Answers.tv. Sign up for a week trial. Check it out. It's phenomenal. It's got tons of content. I just produced a video called Was There Really a Land Before Time? And I kind of go through all of this stuff. It's about a 17-minute, mini documentary on it. Because we need to understand that Christians aren't the only fishers of men out there, right? Dinosaurs are fascinating to kids. And if they don't get truth and they get taught these evolutionary ideas, it's a great way to cripple their faith, right? Christians are not the only fishers of men. It's interesting, several years back now, when Barack Obama was going into his second term, or the election was coming up, and that's when Canadians started paying attention to elections, especially American politics and stuff. I came across an article from a Democrat, of course, liberals and conservatives and Republicans and Democrats. So the liberal, he was complaining that, as per most countries, conservatives outbreed liberals. They have more kids. And he said, well, this is no good. He goes, the children of red states, the conservative ones, are going to, here was his solution to the problem. The problem, he said, was they have more kids, they're going to teach them Republican values, and that's going to, make it bad. But then his solution was this: well, the children of red states will seek a higher education. So the conservatives, the kids, they're going to get a higher education. And that education will very often happen in blue states, the liberal ones. For the foreseeable future, loyal ditto heads will continue to drop off their children at the dorms. And after a teary-eyed hug, mom and dad will drive their SUV off towards the nearest gas station, leaving their beloved progeny behind. Then what he proudly claims? He was a teacher. Then they're all mine. And I got him for 1,000 hours a year to pop whatever I want into their heads. And you can do cleanup crew, but much better if they're equipped before you got to do cleanup crew. Much better to not have to do damage control. That's why we've got amazing resources like this one, A Special Door. This is for little kids. It's a great evangelistic tool. It uses the ark, talking about the one door, the only way to be saved. And Jesus is our door of salvation today. It makes that connection. You can share the gospel with a little kid. I love it with my grandkids. We've got other ones, of course. D is for dinosaur for little ones, and then Dinosaurs, Genesis, and the Gospel, DVDs that you can watch. We've got books, Dinosaurs for kids. This one is fantastic. Dragons, Legends of Lord Dinosaurs. Open up the page. There's all these little pockets you can take out, and it's just really fascinating for kids to learn about this connection between dragons and dinosaurs. I don't have a talk on DVD right now, but Bodie Hodge does one very similar to this. If you want to get something, you can check out that book, Living Fossils: The Grand Experiment, to see what has been found alongside dinosaurs. And once again, I always recommend every Christian should have a mini library here with the Answers books. It's just so foundational to be able to defend your faith.